Welcome back to LA class, everyone. I'm Mr. Raleigh, and today we're going to be taking some notes over the detective story, which is going to be our next genre here in LA class. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we start with the definition here of the detective story. It says the detective story is a type of popular literature in which a crime is introduced and investigated, and the culprit is revealed. So, tons of examples of this in popular culture. We're going to be talking mainly about Sherlock Holmes, but if you are a fan of any of the Law and Orders or CSIs or any of those types of uh, shows, that is the detective story format that we're going to be looking at. A little bit of history here as far as the first detective story. Most people consider Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue to be the first detective story, and it was written in 1868. So even though Poe is known for his horror stories, also the creator of the detective story as well. So fairly interesting. Okay, let's get into it. So, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He is the most famous detective story writer of all time, hands down. When he studied to become a medical doctor, one of his professors possessed an ability Doyle found amazing. The professor was able to determine details about his patients' lives using deductive reasoning. Now, this idea of deductive reasoning is using small details that most people don't notice and putting these small details together to come up with conclusions about things. Or you can basically look at it as throughout the story, Sherlock Holmes is going to be using all of these little details that he finds to make guesses about what he thinks has happened or might happen in the future. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was so impressed with this professor, he actually, in 1877, published a story, the first Sherlock Holmes story, based on his professor's deductive reasoning skills. And thus Sherlock Holmes was born. All right, let's check out Holmes and Watson. So, Holmes, pictured here from the BBC version of Sherlock Holmes, one of my favorite, is the brilliant yet often sarcastic and sometimes downright mean protagonist of all Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's stories. Holmes uses deductive reasoning to help solve crimes he feels are interesting, unique, or challenging. So, the way that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle writes Holmes is that Holmes is always the smartest guy in the room. He's very, very intelligent. However, he's not perfect. So he can be very sarcastic. He gets very annoyed by the fact that people aren't as smart as him and can't reason and deduce things the way that he can. And sometimes this comes out on his sidekick here, Watson, which we'll talk about. Holmes is also not very interested in helping people just to help them. He's fairly selfish in the way that he does this. He essentially only takes crimes that he thinks are interesting, unique, or that he might find challenging. Right? If someone came to him and said, "Oh, this person stole something from me," Holmes probably wouldn't find that interesting. There would have to be something attached to it, or some way that he would find it challenging or unique for him to really want to solve the crime beyond just being a good person. Okay, let's jump over to Watson. All right, Holmes's trusty sidekick, shown here, usually with a excellent mustache, which he's rocking here as well. All of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's stories are told through Watson's journals that he keeps. So Watson keeps a journal of all of the crimes that he and Holmes solve together. And that's how the stories are written, are from Watson's perspective. So Watson is used by the author to represent the reader. We learn the facts of the case as Watson learns them. So the way that this is set up is Watson is kind of used as a representation of the reader. And this is done for a few reasons. Firstly, if the story was told from Holmes' perspective, it would be a bad story because Holmes usually knows what happens and how something happens very early on in the story because he's smarter than everyone else. So if it was told from his perspective, we would know what happened and how it happened right from the very beginning. Because it's told from Watson's perspective, we get to see as Holmes proves what he thinks to be true by gathering evidence along the way. So this way, it makes it a much better story to tell it from Holmes's perspective. Okay, going on. Detective stories in general. All detective stories follow a similar path. Detectives look at three different elements to determine the culprit, or who they think might be the bad guy in any scenario. Now, these three things that we're going to go over are so popular, they are still used today by detectives, not just in stories, but real life detectives, how they find culprits, right, or suspects, and how they can find out whether or not they have committed a certain crime. And these three elements are means, motive, and opportunity. We'll start up here with means. So means, how the crime was committed. So exactly the way it sounds. Right? How was the crime committed? If it was a murder, what was the murder weapon? When did it take place? Those sorts of things, right? How it actually happened. Motive, why the crime was committed. So this is the big why here. So if a crime was committed, why? Was it for money? Was it for revenge? Hatred? Right? There has to be a reason why a crime is committed. Very, very rarely are there random crimes, right? Or random acts of violence or anything like that. There's almost always a motive attached to it. And then finally, opportunity. Did the suspect have the ability to commit the crime? So this is very important because even if someone has means, right, and motive, as in they could have committed, physically were able to commit the crime, and they had a reason to commit the crime, if they don't have the opportunity to commit the crime, then that doesn't matter. For instance, if the person was in a different state at the time that it happened, well, then he might have means and motive, but he doesn't have opportunity. So he can't be the culprit. He can't be the person that did it. He wasn't there at the time of the murder. So this is really important, and this is where things like alibis come into play, right? So does a suspect have a good and reliable alibi, whether that's an actual person saying, no, he was with me at that point, he couldn't have committed the crime, or it could even be like a recording. He was caught on camera somewhere else at the time. And those are really the three kind of holy trinity of elements that detectives use to try to track down their culprits and suspects. All right? Okay, our last slide here. Watch out. So many writers will try to trick readers by including a red herring, right? Or red herrings in general. A red herring is something, especially a clue, that is intended to be misleading or distracting. So in stories, this is when the author will, for instance, have multiple people with motives to commit a crime, right? Maybe for someone, maybe there's a murder and someone could have committed that murder for money. Maybe there's some sort of will involved, and now they'll get some money. But maybe someone else could have committed the murder because of revenge. Maybe that person was betrayed and obviously very angry, and they let people know that they were very angry about it. Maybe they even said out loud, I'm going to kill this person. Right? Well, now we have a problem because we have multiple clues pointing to two different people as to why this murder could have been committed. Right? And that's a red herring. And we will run into many red herrings as we read our mystery stories throughout. And we are going to have to be able to decide what's a red herring and what is a real clue in a story, which we will do. All right, everyone, that is our notes for today, and I will talk to you guys next time.